So, well, that's enough about us. So let's begin our discussion today. Give me 1 second. Again, we are very honored to have Richard Lim, co-founder and managing director, and Yuechen, Zhao, partner at GSR Ventures, to discuss the elephant in the Zoom, the elephant in the room, the COVID-19 and the new opportunities associated with it. And as we all know, the COVID-19 has been leaving us for a while now, and just yesterday, US breaks its national record for the highest number of new COVID cases in a single day. And it probably will be living with us in the foreseeable future. And I have seen people adapting to it differently. Someone loves it. Those are the people who enjoys working from home, while someone hates it. So I would like to kick off today's conversation by asking our guest, Richard and Yuechen, can each of you give our audience, firstly, an introduction about yourself, and secondly, how are you handling the COVID-19 so far?
Yeah, so let me do a brief introduction about ourselves, right? And then I hand over to Yuechen, and then get on to talking about what's more interesting, which is, what type of opportunities we've seen being created by the coronavirus. I was one of the founders. I was an entrepreneur. I went to medical school, worked in public health for a while, went to Stanford Business School, right? And then was both an executive in the US as well as an entrepreneur myself. I started GSR Ventures in 2004. We are now investing our 7th fund. The current fund is roughly about $650 million in US dollars, and then approximately another 150 or $200 million in US dollar equivalent in renminbi. So total of about 800 to $850 million, of which Ariza is LP. We have been actively making investments. We have made, this year, we are more or less on pace for normal. We normally make about 15 new investments a year, right? And for most of you, I think you're familiar with us, but those of you who don't know, you're recently or at some point in China, we were lead investors in companies that you should be familiar with, whether it is for traveling, where I was the lead investor in China, or if you're looking for a girlfriend or boyfriend to get married with, we're lead investors in Baihe. They claim to have, helped some significant percentage of the marriages in China, right? Or if you needed a ride, we were also the first investors in Didi in China. And if you needed food, we were investors in Ele.me. And need a bicycle, well, we did OFO as well, right? So we've invested in a lot of things that have had a significant difference, made a significant difference in life in China. We started actively investing in the United States approximately about 3 years ago, focused primarily on 2 things. We're focused on applying AI to the healthcare space, right, and digital health in particular. And then more broadly, outside of digital health, we also work with the Chinese community, especially with people who want to go back to China or start companies here. We've invested in companies in the applying AI to enterprise. We have some companies in the consumer space as well. Right? So we're excited to be here. We have been very excited at what we're seeing with the coronavirus and what impact that's had. We're seeing companies accelerate their operations by years, right? I mean, we had a company increase their revenues 10x over plan from last year to this year, okay, because of the coronavirus in the US. So I'm going to hand it over to Yuechen and let him tell you about himself.
Yuechen, please.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So so great to see everybody on Zoom. And actually, Ifu, when you said the elephant in the Zoom, I thought I thought you did that on purpose. That's actually
No,
that's great.
that's accident.
That's great. I'm gonna have to take that line. So everybody, my name is Yuechen, or Yuechen. I actually met Richard 4 years ago when I was in China. I was working at a fintech startup and ended up founding my own travel startup. I joined GSR Ventures about 2 years ago here in our California office. I work a lot with our Chinese community here in the Valley. So for people that are looking to start a business, applying AI to enterprise software, or looking to start a business that serves the Chinese market, we work with a lot of those entrepreneurs. And then prior to being in China and prior to joining that fintech startup, I worked at big tech companies here in the Valley, at Google and at Uber, and studied computer science at Harvard. So I think that the coronavirus pandemic has been hard on everybody. I think we have to appreciate that there are a lot of people out there that are struggling as a result. But it's also created some fundamental shifts in our society and have exposed a lot of problems that could be solved and could be moved forward by technology. And so we're really looking forward to talking about that today.
Thanks. Coronavirus definitely has brought a storm to many business. There's a video interviewing Airbnb CEO Brian, and he was saying that Airbnb has spent 12 years building the business and lost almost all of it in 4 to 6 weeks. Travel we knew is over. It doesn't mean that the travel is over, just that the travel we knew is over and it's never coming back. So it's a very sad story. So what are some of the potential long-term effects that this pandemic will have on business and our society?
So let me address that relative to the coronavirus, right? As I mentioned, we've seen some dramatic accelerations. I think it's an interesting thing to look at when you look at how the changes that coronavirus has wrought. What is very apparent to us sitting here, and Yuechen can give you some more specific examples, is that the coronavirus has been a tremendous boost to the businesses in a number of different spaces. Now, it's also been terrible for the travel sector.
Yeah.
Fortunately for Airbnb, their business is largely back to where they were, okay? Just different, okay? But for companies that were funded, like those of you in the US, you've probably seen the news about, I think, a company called Kinsa, which provides a network of smart thermometers that detects the incidence of fever, new infections, right? So their business has gone up 10x, okay, since the coronavirus has happened. In China, we're seeing things like Spark Education, right, which has which has had a tremendous increase in the business, about 5x from last year, again due to corona business. And Xiaohongshu, which is one of our portfolio companies, has seen record numbers. Their DAUs are up last year, roughly about 3x, over because of the coronavirus. So let me hand it over to Yuechen to give you more specific examples. So do not despair. Coronavirus is fantastic. It creates a whole set of new opportunities. We see some fantastic companies created out of this, right? So it's not all bad.
Yuechen, please.
So I think as Richard mentioned, it's challenging for a lot of businesses. It's been challenging for a lot of people, but it's also exposed some problems and some opportunities that are just waiting for a new company or an existing company to go solve. I think the first thing that we'll see with the coronavirus is that a lot of things and a lot of people and a lot of businesses have been forced to do things different. And when you have an event that forces people to think differently, to act differently, and to conduct differently, you begin to see some interesting opportunities come out of it. And I think that, with everyone now working from home, and at least the people that can work from home, with all of us now conducting this webinar online, whereas previously we might have conducted it at the JJ Lake Center in Mountain View, I think it's certainly forced all of us to adapt to this new normal of conducting a lot of events virtually. And extending outside of work, I think we're seeing more and more people ask the question, can this be done virtually? Can this be done online? And this is not the first time that people have asked this question, right? We first asked the question of, can things be brought online with the .com boom in the 90s and in the 2000s, when you saw all kinds of great companies being built and all kinds of imaginative founders, thinking about what can we bring online? Maybe we can bring pet food online. That's how we got pets.com, or maybe we can bring groceries online. That's how we got Webvan. We got Google, we got Amazon, we got all these amazing companies, right? In sort of what I call the first wave of asking, can this be done online? The second wave of asking, can this be done online, was with the smartphone revolution, right? When everyone had a smartphone in their pockets, and that smartphone can now be with you all the time, and you can be connected all the time. And so that brought us companies like Uber, that brought us some amazing gaming companies that really took advantage of that internet connectivity. And now I think we're on to our third wave. And the third wave really is being accelerated by the coronavirus. We now have much higher bandwidth for most of our internet connections. Even thinking back to 5 years ago, unlimited cell phone plans were pretty rare. Now, unlimited cell phone plans all over the world are getting more and more prevalent. We're able to have now this webinar, through Zoom, and have pretty great video and audio quality, whereas even 5 years ago, maybe you can only hear about half of what I'm saying. So this new technological infrastructure, which is this advanced broadband and improved audio and video capabilities, have enabled a lot of things. They have enabled education to be remote. For the first time, this is probably the first mass experimentation with remote virtual education that we've ever really done. It's been tough on a lot of school systems, but at the same time, because now people have tried to experiment with it, I think now people are going to be much more likely to be open to the idea of conducting a large part of education online, virtually, and using software, which in turn produces a lot of data that can be used to personalize learning and to help students learn even better, things that we couldn't have done offline, right? If we think about work, now that people are working from home, if you've been following the articles, there are a lot of people that are postulating, what does that really mean, right? What does that really mean for a lot of white collar workers? Does this mean that they get a lot more mobility? Does this mean that they can live in a lot of different hubs? Does this now suddenly create an opportunity for hubs like Denver, for hubs like Austin, to finally become, finally have the same access to opportunities and to resources that maybe previously were denied them just because of their geographical location, right? And does this mean that companies can now hire more efficiently remotely and be able to have a remote workforce that's just as effective as ones that are concentrated in huge, expensive office buildings? So I think those are interesting questions, right? If we look at the United States, grocery delivery has been something that's been on the rise for a long time, but it's never been something that exploded, right? And now with the coronavirus pandemic, many people have tried grocery delivery for the first time ever. So, we see things like Walmart, the Walmart grocery app, which many of you might not have even known about prior to the pandemic, getting about only 20,000 downloads per day in February before the pandemic, and suddenly shooting up to 60,000 app downloads per day, right, in March. So, that's a huge 3x growth in downloads per day, and that's driving a lot of growth for the Walmart grocery app as well, right? So, when the Walmart grocery app, when the Instacart app, now gets downloaded 40K times per day, that means a lot more people are signing up, are putting in their credit cards, are experiencing what it means to order groceries online. And once they really understand how this works, and once they see that this could be a good experience, then those apps, I expect, will be able to retain a lot of those users and be able to innovate even more on top of what they've already built, right? So I think that's just a few of the examples of the things that we've already seen, right? Where there are these new problems, there are these new opportunities, and there are companies that are coming out and stepping up to the challenge. We're currently using Zoom, right? I mean, one of the most amazing pieces of data that we've seen come out of Zoom is that there were 10 million daily meeting participants in December of 2019. But then you fast forward to March, suddenly there are 200 million daily meeting participants in March of 2020, right? So that kind of growth, I don't think Zoom would have ever expected prior to COVID. But because now everyone has the Zoom client, everyone has experienced what it's like to conduct a remote meeting, video call. Now I think more and more people will be interested in using this method of communication that can actually dramatically affect the way that we work, right? If you look at us, if you look at the VC industry, prior to this, I think many of us would have chosen to meet face to face with the entrepreneurs that we meet, right? And with people that want to get some information from us, or that we want to get some information from them, we might choose to meet face to face, and that requires a bunch of coordination, traveling, and everything. But now that everyone has gotten used to video conferencing, and everyone has seen that you can actually have an efficient transfer of information through this medium, right? I expect that we'll be conducting a lot more meetings online, even when the lockdown ends and even when things go back to normal, just because it's a much more efficient way. It's much faster to be able to get someone, to be able to talk to them, and to be able to interact with them, right? So I think there are going to be some major changes that really come as a result of this.
I'm glad that you brought this.
I'll just jump in and talk a little bit about that, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at China, which has largely come out of the coronavirus, okay, and they're having in-person meetings again. I mean, our staff are back in the office, and even then, our investors in China have largely decided that they prefer to take first meetings and often second follow-up meetings online, right? Whether Zoom or WeChat. Zoom being the preferred medium to do that, rather than meeting in person, which I think tremendously accelerates things, especially for somebody who's not in Beijing, or even in Beijing. For most of you, I think you're familiar with Beijing. Traffic in Beijing is horrible. If you're looking, our office is in Guomao. If you're living, if your company is in Zhongguancun, it's like a 2-hour drive in traffic, right? Or half a day just to get there and come back. Now you can do Zoom, right? And you can do the meeting in half an hour, right? So it's tremendously more efficient both for us and for the company. Mm-hmm. Tremendous change, I think. I think the net result is that it's a lot easier for somebody starting a company to get first meetings with venture funds.
So yes, like Richard and Yuechen mentioned, many businesses took a big hit from the pandemic, but it also opens an opportunity window to some other business. For example, like Yuechen mentioned, the grocery delivery service. For example, like the Asia grocery delivery company, we previously invited Larry's investor on one of our JJ Lake episodes to tell us the story. So they are really riding the wave during the pandemic. So Richard and Yuechen, so what are some new opportunities for startups that resulted from this pandemic? Maybe you guys can elaborate from GSR's domain, like consumer platform, enterprise AI, and healthcare.
Yeah, I think we're seeing them in all of them, right? I mean, I think that there are significant portions in healthcare, which had a tremendous acceleration. We've seen that in both China and the US. I mean, telehealth has had a tremendous acceleration in use and adoption. Mm-hmm. I think there was like 100x change in China, and we saw pretty much the same thing. I mean, Sutter Health here told us they went from 30 appointments. Sutter Health, for those of you living in the Bay Area, Palo Alto Medical Foundation, right, one of the largest providers of healthcare here in the Bay Area, went from 30 appointments a day to 1,000 appointments a day, right? This is from January to April, right? Because nobody wanted to go to the office, right? So we certainly saw telehealth go tremendously. We saw many other digital health opportunities come up. And then if you look at what happened in education, I think Yuechen can touch on more, because especially in China, less so in the US because the infrastructure didn't exist, there was a tremendous boost in the adoption of online education, right? And I think Yuechen can point to some specific examples later. And we saw the same thing at enterprise. We talked about Zoom. Zoom's up. You know, you probably, for those of you who are fortunate enough to bought Zoom shares, right? You know, the traffic has gone up roughly, you know, 300, you know, like 100x, right? And even the big established companies had tremendous increase. Microsoft had a big increase in Teams, Ding Ding and Ding Ding Talk and WeChat Work also had the same thing. Okay, so we'll touch upon those things. Yuechen.
Yeah, of course. I mean, just to give you a couple of examples, if we look at education, right? I think historically it's been a sector that's been growing really quickly in China, as we all know. You know, Yuanfudao, Zuoyebang, Huhua Siwei, which is one of our portfolio companies, and these companies have been doing fantastically well even before the COVID pandemic. But with COVID, with a lot of students now sitting at home, not getting the same kind of education that they would be inside the classroom, I think a lot of parents are now turning to online solutions in order to really help their kids stay more focused and be able to enrich their learning in a way that, you know, they're losing out by being at home. So, you know, if we look at Huhua Siwei, which really provides math and creative thinking education for K through 12 students in China, they sold 30% of 2019's GMV in 1 month in April of 2020. Right? So that's just one data piece that really shows you that explosion in demand that we're seeing in the China market. And it's not just confined to the China market. Right? If we look at the US market, some of you might have seen that Masterclass. If you've never heard of the company before, it is a company that gets these celebrities and just, you know, all of the experts in their respective fields to come online, to go in front of the camera and to tell you about, you know, how they really got to where they are and maybe show you, you know, Serena Williams maybe will teach you a few tricks in tennis, or some celebrity chef will teach you a few dishes. So that specific company prior to the pandemic had a lot of trouble acquiring customers and had a lot of trouble growing, but once the pandemic hit, suddenly it's like the floodgates just opened. They recently raised another $800 million. Or, you know, one of the more established platforms in the US, Udemy, which allows you to learn anything from photography to cooking to basic programming to, you know, financial accounting. For that platform, they've also seen some really, really amazing growth, right? So compared to February, they saw a 425% increase in enrollments in March of this year. Right? They published this data themselves, right? So we know that it's genuine. They saw 4 times as many students enrolling in courses after the pandemic than prior. So I really think that, especially in the education sector, you know, we're already seeing, you know, 3x, 4x, 5x growth. And, you know, I think that type of growth is going to create a lot more opportunities for new companies to take a look at, well, you know, what types of education haven't been digitized, have not yet been digitized, or, you know, which parts of education can really be improved with more data analytics, with more AI personalization, with better content that's really not available today online. You know, by taking advantage of the newfound demand, and of course, with all of these now consumers that have tried it for the first time and hopefully have had a good experience with it, they're going to be looking for other opportunities to learn more things online. And I think that creates a really great opportunities for entrepreneurs both here in the US and in China. Richard also mentioned work, right? You know, we already gave the example of Zoom, but, you know, work is not just Zoom. Right, Zoom is, as a basic infrastructure, is fantastic, and in fact, as a result of all this new user growth, Zoom has just announced that they're now creating an open developer framework and an open SDK for anyone to build any application on top of Zoom's video infrastructure. I mean, this is an opportunity that maybe previously just, you know, was not available to anybody, and now you can think about all of the amazing things you can build on top of this basic Zoom experience to really bring more color into each different vertical and each different circumstance. So take this webinar, for example, right? I think, you know, Zoom has some pretty basic Q&A and chatting functionality for us to be able to communicate with one another through these channels. But you can think about, you know, other features that you can build on top of this, where maybe each of our participants can interact with one another and can, you know, have a networking session just like you would have, prior to this webinar. Maybe we'd have a pizza room right next to this webinar where people can grab pizza and talk to each other and socialize. And right now that experience really isn't very fluid online yet. And we see quite a few companies that are trying to do this, right? We have one of our portfolio companies, which is a company started by a Stanford GSV MBA dropout, that's trying to do exactly this, trying to replicate a lot of that social component that you'll get from an offline conference or an offline event and try to bring it online, right? And that's an example of taking this existing infrastructure, really, thinking about the different use cases that this infrastructure is used for, and thinking about whether we can replicate those offline experiences in a better way. So I think that's just a few of the examples, right? But there's newfound demand, there's new consumer education, and there's new willingness to accept moving a lot more of our activities virtually creates a great opportunity for entrepreneurs to ask again, what can we bring online?
So let me just answer somebody asked a question, about our investment pace. I think we said, I think our investment pace is largely what we had expected. So there was initially a slowdown in China because everybody was out of the country and the lockdown was very severe, right? But we're back now roughly on pace. In fact, we're going to add an extra partners meeting next week because we have too many companies coming in to present, right? I think that the difference is that there is a change in the types of companies that we're focused on. We like most of our the VC industry is much more focused on the companies that have been seeing an acceleration because of the coronavirus. Right? So the companies that raised, so if I look at our companies, right, in this space, the ones that have term sheets, the ones that have financings in progress, right, recently, have all been companies that have seen acceleration of their business because of the coronavirus. And when we look at the companies that come across, the ones that have acceleration get our attention much more quickly. Right. So now the next lot of companies, if you have not seen a slowdown because of coronavirus, okay, even that is a positive, okay, because that means that your business is not being materially affected. Now, if you're seeing a dramatic slowdown in your business, then you should think about whether you want to do a pivot to something that's not affected by the coronavirus, or perhaps do a hibernation for a while until you see an acceleration happen. Right. I mean, and there are multiple opportunities of this type. So somebody asked the question, do we expect do we expect the growth? Expect some of the companies. Yuechen's talked on a bunch of them. I think that they occur particularly in the sectors, right, where you have remote work, where you can do things remotely that you could not do before, and where you are replacing vulnerable workers in person. So we're seeing, perhaps a little bit surprisingly, but we have a number of companies in the smart robotics space, Flexi in China and the US, right? Nimble here. And they're seeing a tremendous acceleration in their interest to adopt the manufacturing robots, right? Because the manufacturers realize that having, packed assembly lines is a danger, right? The companies that are in the e-commerce space are looking for solutions because they know that the warehouses are a source of infections, right? And there's an increase in business, and having the ability to replace human labor or enhance human labor by robots is no longer just an economic proposition, but a business continuity issue. Mm-hmm. Right. So Yuechen, I think maybe we should talk about some of the companies we've invested in recently and the type of
acceleration we've seen. Yeah, I think I'd be happy to give everybody even more context here and more color. So, for instance, we actually just made an investment in a new company, and this company specifically serves the hospitality industry, right? So if you think about the hospitality industry, as Richard just mentioned, I mean, it's a sector that's been really heavy hit by COVID. A lot of people are choosing to stay home, are canceling their summer vacation plans, and especially business travel has dramatically decreased, right? We can talk about business travel later, but I think that's one sector that's actually going to see, probably going to be affected for a very long time to come. But this company, when COVID first hit, the founders kind of became very nervous, right? Because they knew that travel was going to take a dive, and they knew that people are not going to want to, businesses in the hospitality sector are not going to want to buy new solutions. But they happened to come across a new need that they can satisfy, which is that these the hotels now, they're looking for an easier way to check their guests in if they have guests coming to the property, right? So if they want to open back up at all, they need to be able to get several things from their guests, right? Number one, they need to be able to confirm that the guests are healthy before they arrive on property. Because if the guests are not healthy, then you'll end up having to turn them away, right? After they've arrived, and that's not very good. So prior to guests arriving on property, a lot of counties are now requiring that you ask the guests, hey, do you have a fever? Have you been in contact with anyone with COVID in the last 14 days? Have you been out of the country in the last 14 days? I mean, these are some very basic questions that you need to be able to ask in order to prevent liability for the property. So a lot of hotels are struggling with that. Another thing that hotels are really struggling with is they don't want to have long lines at their check-in counters, which is inevitably going to happen if you have a bunch of people that all have to be socially distanced and wearing masks and trying to check into their room at the peak of people arriving at the property. So they're also looking for ways for people to pre-check in before they arrive on property. And you might be able to do this at a Marriott property, especially if you have the Bonvoy app. But for a boutique property, a lot of times they don't have that type of capability. So what this company has pivoted to do is they've taken what they previously have, which is a messaging platform that connected guests with front desk, and they've used this messaging platform to instead solve these new problems, right? Which is, being able to connect the front desk with the guest before the guest arrives on property, sending them the health questionnaire, getting all of the check-in information from them before they arrive on site. So that when they do arrive on site, all they have to do is grab their key cards and head up to their now sanitized room. And so it's dramatically changed how hotels are going to view their operations. It's dramatically affected the guest experience. And I think that type of experience is here to stay, right? So I think this is a great example of a company that was hit by COVID, but then managed to pivot their business so that in this new post-COVID world, they're actually able to accelerate their growth. So that's just one example. I think Richard also just mentioned Kinsa, right? So Kinsa is our smart thermometer company, and previously they were selling this smart thermometer to parents and to kids, so that one, you have an easier experience, taking your temperature and knowing what to do when your temperature is high. But also, they're actually able to take the data that's from the thermometers and be able to track flu patterns all over the US, right? And if you're able to track flu patterns, you're actually able to help a lot of companies, a lot of health systems be able to prepare for major flu outbreaks, so that they can have the right supplies and they can have the right infrastructure in place, right, in order to accommodate the influx. Now, of course, this year it's not about the flu, right? This year it's about COVID. And one of the major symptoms of COVID is fever. So they've completely adapted with the platform to be able to track COVID infections. And what's really cool is that they've been able to demonstrate that prior to new infections showing up as a result of testing, they can already predict almost one-to-one where major flare-ups of infections are going to be just by looking at increases of abnormal fevers across the US. And so now with this system of thermometers out in the wild and being able to track fevers all over the country, they're able to partner up with health systems, with states, cities, and counties in order to help them get a head start on addressing major coronavirus flare-ups in a way that they would otherwise have not been able to at all, right? There's no other data source today that allows people to have a 2-week lead up to a major flare up and to be able to prepare resources. So I think that's just a couple of examples of our portfolio where, you know, they've taken what they, an infrastructure that they've built previously, but they're solving some real problems during the COVID pandemic.
Right.
So there are a couple of questions from the audience, which I think we might address, Yuechen can address on that. So somebody asked, is it time to be starting a new company? I think this is an incredible time to be starting a company. It's always a good time to start, you know, when you have turmoil and change, it's a fantastic time to start do a startup because you know, you have an opportunity to disrupt existing incumbents. I mean, just look at Netflix is now worth more than Disney. Who would have imagined that even 2 years ago, right? Or a year ago. So if you think about what is happening, I think that what type of company also makes a difference, right? Now is not a good time to be starting a company that is adversely impacted by the coronavirus. But if you look at, if your business idea is something like Yuechen mentioned about, you know, helping hospitality industries come back online, right, in a more efficient way, then this is a tremendous time to be starting a company. And it's the same in the US, whether it's in US or China, the same thing applies, right? Something that where there's real demand that's happening. I think that somebody is asking a question whether, you know, things are going to be different between the US and China, you know, and whether it's good to going back to China. We always think it's a good time to go back to China, but I'll let Yuechen talk about the differences between the US and China.
So I think let's address those two questions separately. So thank you for asking those questions. So I think first, you know, do we expect the opportunities post-COVID to be different between China and the US? I think that in general, we expect the problem space to be the same, right? So for instance, this new push to bring more things online, to bring education online, to bring work online, to make things that, you know, previously we wanted to do exclusively offline and think about how they might be adapted in a virtual world. I do think that opportunity space is going to be the same, but in terms of how it's going to develop, I think it's going to be totally different. Right? So let's just take work as an example. Right? If we look at the United States as a proportion of the total workforce, you have many more white collar workers than you do in China. Right? So if you look at, you know, just geographically across the US, I think more and more white collar workers are going to be able to take advantage of all of these things, all of these new software capabilities and infrastructure that we're building in order to enable them to be more effective virtually. But if you look at China, I think that's going to be true in a lot of China's first and second tier cities where there's a lot of professional services industries. There are a lot of white collar workers. So we're already seeing that activity, right? More and more software companies are building remote work capabilities that allow these white collar workers to be more efficient. And so I think they will be able to take advantage of that. But if you look at the rest of China's economy, in the third and fourth tier cities and in the villages and towns where a lot of the economy is still quite local, I don't think they're going to be able to take advantage as much of the remote working opportunities, right? So that's just a fact. When you're thinking about these two different markets, you need to look at what type of infrastructure is available. You need to look at the economic makeup and then make a decision for yourself. You know, what is an opportunity that is possible in the US and what is an opportunity that maybe is not. If we look at education, I think it's similar, right? Because the education systems in US and China are so different. Prior to COVID, we already saw a lot of advancements in the Chinese edtech ecosystem with the companies that I was mentioning earlier. They're actually able to get a lot of consumer demand and solve a lot of problems for them, which is the fact that a lot of them need to go through Gaokao, right? Whereas here in the US, because there's only one standardized test, and that standardized test you can take multiple times, the SAT and ACT, people spend a little bit less on test prep. So prior to COVID, we didn't see education really taking off. Now in China, because there's already a lot of demand for education, when COVID hit and you see this dramatic growth, you have this huge base on top of which already to grow. In the US, I think now with the coronavirus here seemingly to stay, more school systems, more higher education institutions, and more parents and students are going to be thinking hard for the first time, how do I learn effectively remotely? How do I learn effectively in a classroom setting that's now being held over Zoom? And so I think there's going to be a lot of innovation that comes out of it, but it's not going to be a base on top of which you can already grow. I think it's more going to be a 0 to 1, right? And then the final thing I say about China and the US is if you actually look at the coronavirus response in China, I think we've been much more effective with controlling the coronavirus, with clamping down on the coronavirus. Many regions of China have returned to some kind of a normal. Whereas here in the US, I think, given the number of cases that are still happening in each state, in each county, and given that a lot of reopening plans are now being stalled, Texas actually just announced that they're going to stop all reopening and reassess their reopening strategy. It's a little bit more unclear in how long we're going to be in this state where we're absolutely forced to do things virtually. So I think that specific factor will also affect how to think about these opportunities. And in terms of going back to China, we always say that if you think that you have an opportunity, some experiences here in the US, and you think that there is an opportunity in China, we always think that the Chinese market needs a lot more smart, educated persons to go back to China and really, really make a big impact. I think China has advanced a lot over the last few years. China is a totally different country from 10 years ago, but there's still many, many, many industries and many, many, many opportunities that are waiting for brave entrepreneurs and a lot of problems that are waiting for entrepreneurs to solve.
So let me jump in here for a second. So just in case the audience don't know, we're actually taking the Q&A question openly right now. So if you get questions for Richard and Yuechen, feel free to raise it by typing your question down as a Q&A. So let's move on to the next Q&A question. Let's pick one question from the QA board. So it's a question from Bao Hua. So do you have any advice for new grads just entering VC firm as an investment analyst in order to be successful in VC? Thank you very much.
Yuechen, do you want to answer that?
Actually, I was going to say, Richard, maybe you should answer that. I think I can answer it as someone who hasn't been in the VC industry as long as Richard. I think one of the most important pieces of advice that Richard first gave me when I joined the firm is that this is a job that's, in order to be good at this job, you have to really like learning, because things are changing all the time. There's new technologies that are always coming out, new changes in society, and new changes in the economy that you always have to be aware of in order to actually understand, what are some of the real opportunities to build really impactful businesses. So, just thinking back to, when I first joined the firm to now, I've had to really pick up a lot of knowledge on, what are some of the new AI capabilities, right? What are some of the ways that we can use those AI capabilities to build interesting businesses, right? And as the months go by, there are always new things that come up, and COVID is a fantastic example. Right now that COVID has hit, really, as VCs, we're thought partners for our entrepreneurs, and we're there to support our entrepreneurs. And in order to do that, we have to be able to piece together information and form new theses around what are some of the ways that our companies can try to pull through the pandemic and identify new opportunities and new problems for those companies to solve. And we have to continuously do that for the companies that we've already invested in, and we have to continue to do that to find new opportunities for new companies to invest in. So that would be what I say. I think you just always have an open mind for learning.
So Yuechen, maybe, I think if those of you didn't catch Yuechen's background, he had almost the best possible background you could pick for wanting to do venture capital, right? He graduated with a computer science degree, right? Works doing product management, which is a great introduction to what happens in the company, right? At Google and then Uber. you know, spent a lot of money for Uber, as I recall, right? Which is how we got to know him, because he's working at Uber China, and then worked at a startup and then started the company himself, right? So in the space of, how long was that, 4 years?
That was 4 years, yeah.
Right. But tremendous background, right, for venture fund. And I think that served you tremendously well, you know, as you did. I don't know how you feel about it, but, you know, I think that gave you a tremendous background relative to, you know, to helping entrepreneurs. You remember that our business is to help people. We don't just provide money, we help people.
Yeah. And even then, you know, I'd say, I mean, there's just so much that I learned from Richard and from everyone else at the fund. You know, even with those experiences, there are things about how capital markets work, and there are things about sort of higher level business strategy, especially when you're thinking about all of these different business models. A lot of this intuition and a lot of your own theses need to be formed over time. So I feel incredibly lucky to be able to learn at GSR, and I feel incredibly lucky to be working with our entrepreneurs who are, you know, just inspirational or working on some really big and really impactful problems.
Next question is from Jerry Zhang. What do you think of the transformation from offline to online education? Virtual conferences is just a tool, but so what is the principle of education? For example, like loss of a human communication.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I actually think we can probably look to China for some clues here, right? Because when the Chinese edtech companies first got started, I think a lot of us had the same question, right? Are you actually able to do this effectively online? Are you going to lose that teacher-student relationship, which is so important, right? That type of mentorship. I know that I certainly benefited a lot when I was growing up from my teachers actually knowing me as a person and being able to educate me, you know, not just in a subject, but then also, you know, in my character and in my personality. So I'd say that we still have a lot of work to do there. I think that we can have much better communication already online because, you know, there's much less lag over video and audio, because now the video and audio is a lot clearer. So I think we're getting some of that. But in order to truly move a lot of education online, I think, you know, we're going to have to combine it with more tools and with more workflows where we can build some of that personal connection. Just outside of education, when we're doing investing, right, that's actually one thing that we've been talking about a lot, which is how do we build this personal connection with our founders, especially with founders that we've never met before offline, right? Because we believe that with that personal connection, you know, we can be a lot more effective. So we've been thinking hard about that. You know, we've been thinking about ways to socialize virtually. We've been thinking about ways to play games virtually. You know, even within our fund, we've tried different things like trivia, and you know, we have this walking challenge right now where you know, people are, you know, if you manage to hit a certain number of steps goal every week, we actually have enter you into a prize pool, and you know, we'll reward you with some bubble tea or with with some DoorDash credit. So you know, we're experimenting with that as well. But I do think that when we move into this virtual world, we cannot lose human connection because that kind of trust is really, you know, is really how we're going to be able to be a lot more effective, and we just can't lose it.
Next question. What are your views on the future of a self-driving industry, and how soon we will be seeing self-driving cars on a bigger scale? Can you talk about your views on self-driving in both US and China?
Hey, Yifu, before I answer that, let me ask you a question, right?
Okay.
So we're scheduled to run for an hour. I think we're 2 minutes away from the end.
Oh, that's true.
Are you going to stop at 6 sharp, or do you intend to go on a little bit more?
It depends. Do you two have time? If you have
we can stay a bit more, right? I think the attendees, some of them are going to drop off. I mean, my answer to self-driving industry is that it's been disappointing relative. We have investments in the space, obviously, right? But it's been disappointing. It's been disappointing in terms that, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we said that by 2019, we will have self-driving taxis all over the place, right? Well, we obviously don't have them yet, whether in China or the US is irrelevant, right? The technology is going to take many more years before it becomes mature enough to be deployed. So I think it's just we can talk about it. I think it will eventually happen. It'll be transformative when it happens, okay? But, it's not going to happen anytime soon, okay? I think somebody asked a question, metrics to look at business, whether it be handling COVID correctly. I think that the quick answer is that if you are able to sign on customers during this period, you're in good shape. If you cannot get customers during this period, or you get, or even worse, if you're losing customers, right, that you already have, then you're in trouble, okay? Right. So if you're getting customers and signing them on, you're probably in good space. I think
how about this, Richard and Yuechen? Let's pick one question from the QA boards as our ending question. And do you guys want to pick one from the list?
There's a question for Yuechen.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Good question.
I'm happy to talk about it. I think that this is so in order to answer, so the question is, whether I could talk a little bit more about myself. Why did I choose to do a startup in China instead of doing a startup in the US? And in order to give that background, I actually was born in China. I was born in Shenyang. But my mom's from Shenyang, my dad's from Hubei. I actually did a little bit of elementary school education in China. I went through 1st and 2nd grade. Then I moved to the US with my parents and mostly grew up here for elementary, middle school, high school. And when I went off to college, I actually, even though I was able to be conversational in Chinese, I didn't really have a lot of Chinese around me. And I didn't get a lot of exposure to China. And in college, I ended up joining this organization called the Harvard China Forum, where we would host a large-scale China conference every year, and we would invite some of the bigwigs from China to come speak at Harvard. At the time, it wasn't tech, right? So when I was doing this, it was all the real estate gurus, Wang Shi, Wang Jianlin. It was all the airline gurus, Chen Feng over at Hainan. Those were the bigwigs in business in China, and so we bring them over, and that was actually the first time that I got a chance to interact with Chinese businessmen and businesswomen, and really get to learn from them firsthand what China was like. And as a result of that conference, I really felt that I needed to go see China for myself, which is how I ended up going from Google to Uber, where I worked on the China market. As Richard was just mentioning, I actually worked on our China marketplace efficiency, which is a really fancy way of saying, how do we spend money in China such that we get more bang for our buck? And at the time, our main rival was Didi. Basically, we were fighting on all fronts. And a lot of the traffic that we were able to get was as a result of the hongbao that we're giving to both drivers and to riders. So it was basically my team's job to come up with a more efficient way to allocate the money that we were spending in China and to spend it such that we can spend it in the most impactful pockets. At the zenith of our spend in China, we were spending about $50 million every single week just on incentives. So we joke that every week we basically killed or burned 10 startups. So that was my first foray into China.
That's a lot of money,
That's a lot of
money. $1,500 a week. How many weeks did you do that for?
Oh, we did not do that for too many weeks. I think we did that for about that was at the very peak, but we did that for about 3 to 4 weeks, and that was pretty soon after we got Apple's investment. So Apple invested $1 billion, and then we got Saudi Arabia to invest $3 billion. So with $4 billion additional dollars in the war chest, that was when we decided, well, we need to up our spend. So anyway, that was that crazy experience. And after that ended, because I was already in China working with a lot of our colleagues in China, I thought that I would just stay in China, and I ended up joining a fintech startup. And worked at that fintech startup basically as one of the first early employees, building out our entire platform from 0 to 1. And I fell in love with travel, which is how I ended up founding a travel startup, really trying to help Chinese travelers travel overseas. For me, I thought that was a great fit for my background because I knew the China market already because I was already there, and I knew that I could gain an understanding for the Chinese consumer and what problems they were facing when they were trying to travel overseas. And I also had this unique ability to connect with tour operators and with travel suppliers all over the world. And so, I really thought that that was a great opportunity for me to go pursue. And I did that for a year. So I didn't think too hard about where I wanted to do a startup. I knew that I wanted to build something in a space that I cared about and try to solve a problem. And I just happened to be in China. I happened to find that space interesting. So that's why I did it there. If you're interested in more, you can always reach out to me offline, and we can chat about what you want to work on.
Great. Thank you, Yuechen. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, you two, for joining us today. Regarding, that's pretty much about today. And regarding next episode, we're inviting Alchemist, the founder, Ravi Lani, to give us a talk regarding the B2B business. So it's going to be next Thursday. While we have a close relationship with Alchemist Accelerator, JJ Lake is actually one of Alchemist's physical spots in Silicon Valley. And hopefully we will knock down the topic and we will be sending out a blast next Monday. Thank you all the audience for joining us tonight. And thanks again, Richard and Yuechen. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Have a great night. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.